Hey everyone, I'm Larry Walsh, and this is Changing Channels. To say that we are in a transformative period would be an understatement. And I will tell you that I have spent many a years dismissing anyone who's ever said that we're in the greatest transformational period ever, because we go through these episodically. There are new trends and new innovations that come along every 5 to 10 years that really are game changers. Um, this one though is different. It's because we're racing towards this convergence of artificial intelligence built on platforms and ecosystems that are going to transform and enable and change the economics of technology as well as the entire world. It's still largely misunderstood. There's some really interesting things that are going on out in the market. There's some things that are still rather nebulous. And there are companies out there that are making big bets on the futures. And there are other companies out there that are still waiting to see what's going to happen. But the thing that we know is that the world is changing fundamentally, and it's not going to be the same again. It actually is going to be radically different going forward in the future. The technology will be different. The way we interface with technology, what technology does for us, both for us and independently of us, and how that changes value, both the value of the technology as well as the value of the people using it or the companies that employ it. These are all big, heady topics, particularly when you start thinking about changes from how we're going to go from a world based on scarcity to a world based on abundance. Those days are coming and they're coming fast. So we decided to invite our friend Greg Sarafin. Greg is a former member of the management team at EY. He spent a lot of time developing strategies and models for ecosystems and platforms. And he thinks a lot about what automation, what AI, and what the post-scarcity world is going to look like. So Greg and I have had a very interesting conversation about what the future is going to look like through the lens of ecosystems, platforms, and artificial intelligence. This is Changing Channels. Let's get on with it. Greg Sarafin, thanks for joining Changing Channels. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Hey, not too bad for this day, whatever day this is. So really appreciate you jumping in, having this conversation with me. Like before we jump into the things we want to talk about, let's get the business about you out of the way. You recently retired from EY. Um, Tell us a little bit about that and the way you're looking at your future and the work you did and how that's going to carry forward.
Well, as you say, I had a great opportunity. The last decade of my career has been with EY. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. I'm actually 42 years into my career journey, which I hope goes to 100, maybe more. We'll see.
Yeah.
I'm a bit of a longevity nut. Uh, this last chapter, well, first of all, my career generally has been at the intersection of professional services, which has sort of been the baseline, and then very oriented on tech. Larry, I'm an engineer by both training and by temperament. And so professional services, a lot of technology enabled consulting services I've done over my career. I also have done a lot of work, particularly serving financial services sector clients, although I've also worked in other sectors as well. I did do a stint at IBM where I got to sell full stack, so hardware, software, outsourcing, and services, but primarily services. EY has been a great experience for me. I joined 10 years ago in their financial services business to help build what was a rapidly growing technology consulting capability there. And then a few years in, a funny thing happened on the way to the forum. We had you know how these career journeys are. Sometimes they're planned and sometimes they're surprise. This was definitely a surprise. I was asked to come out of financial services and to join the global leadership team to help build EY's ability to generate value for their clients with partners. At the time, EY was pretty big at $33 billion globally, but we were only doing about $1 billion in real partner revenues. which was at the time laggard. We were a laggard relative to our peers. And so we purposely set forth on it turned out to be an 8-year journey in my case, including this last year, but to go from worst to at least first in terms of growth and impact. And I think we did a pretty good job of that. We went from $1 billion to almost 10. At the same time, the company went from 33 to 52. And so, about 45% of our growth while I was there was with our partners. And, you're in partnering yourself, Larry, so you already know why that is. But it's been transformational for EY. It's been fun, and it's had a great impact, and it's a great foundation for EY as they're sort of bending into the AI era now and really taking that next step forward.
Well, but at the same time, though, is that you're in a bit of a transition too. I mean, you've had a great amount of success there, but you are moving forward.
Yeah, I'm like I said, I'm 42 years in, but I'm not stopping. I feel like I'm the best version of me I've ever been. Got serious about taking care of my health and particularly my mental acuity. Although there's some people on some days that might argue with that.
With all of us, for that matter.
Yeah, that's right. But right now, I'm just having fun. I've had a lot of operational roles the last quarter century, and increasingly bigger operational roles. And I thought, you know what, maybe I'm just going to do a little advisory work. And so I've just been having a blast, Larry, working with smaller entities, portfolio companies, et cetera, and working directly with their C-suites, advising them. Either if they're professional services companies, sort of on the full value chain and how to grow their businesses, and if they're more specific, like tech companies, maybe more focused on the go-to-market, maybe a little bit around the partner ecosystem, those sorts of things. But I'm just having a lot of fun right now, Larry, working with companies to help them, pivot into this new technology S-curve we have and really take advantage of the market opportunity they have in front of them.
And that's what we really want to talk about here is those future opportunities. And the first time I met you, you were giving a presentation essentially talking about EY's perspective on platforms and the players that feed into platforms. And these are two concepts that we talk a lot about in technology industry, but it's not unique to technology. The idea about ecosystems and having platforms on which you build on. But how is this changing, though? I mean, I will admit to you that I have been the contrarian when it comes to ecosystems, not because I don't believe in them. I just find that it is an abused term, that it is not something that it's something that people talk about that they don't actually practice. But the customers actually need the actual consumers of all the things that we produce actually need that ecosystem effect. Why is now different?
I think there's a number of things at play here. I think first, ecosystems exist whether you believe in them or not. The only question is, how seriously do you take the fact that you are an ecosystem, no matter what industry you're in, and your role in that ecosystem? Are you a participant? What type of participant are you? Or are you an orchestrator? And in that case, what kind of orchestrator are you? Now, to be an orchestrator, that's a different sort of a thing. To be an orchestrator, I believe you also have to be a platform business model, right? And to me, that's the big intersection between the concept of ecosystem and the concept of platform. I've said many times my favorite platform company is Ryobi. I buy their batteries, and then I buy at very low incremental cost all these wonderful tool appliances I can put on top of those batteries to basically butcher my house every weekend. So that is a platform business. It is a battery platform business, but it's not really an ecosystem business. So first point is you can be a platform business, but not orchestrate an ecosystem and still be quite successful. However, I think there are, in every industry, we're seeing a pivot in those industries to what's next. And that predates AI, but AI is accelerating it. So I'll use something that we're all familiar with, which is the automobile industry. So the automobile industry is very rapidly now making the journey to a mobility industry. And, business models like Uber, which was a marketplace platform business model, started that disruption over a decade ago. But that disruption is going to accelerate with full self-driving vehicles, autonomous vehicles. At some point, we're going to stop buying cars and we're just going to buy access to mobility. And the right type of vehicle is going to pick us up and convey us to the destination we need to be at when we need it without even needing to hail it, right? That's sort of the end state vision. Well, there's going to be companies that are the platforms that enable that business model. And then there are going to be companies that sort of add value to the platform to round out the value proposition to the end client, because no one company has the capital to do everything to enable the mobility business, or pick a business. It doesn't matter. Every industry has its version of this. And so I do believe that we're going to see the rise of platform businesses at scale in every single industry. We already have them in tech. They're hyperscalers. And that those platform businesses, to become the leaders, to build that moat, to aggregate supply and demand, will become the masters of orchestrating the ecosystem around them to round out the value proposition for the end clients. So that's how I, at least in my calculus, relate those concepts of platform and ecosystem. And I agree with you. Ecosystem has been overused. I've overused it over the last 8 years myself. But to me, there's ecosystems, and then there's ecosystem orchestrators. And ecosystem orchestrators typically are platform businesses, because a platform business, to be successful, needs to be an orchestrator. That's my simple narrative.
This is the way I typically describe this, right? For years, I've been talking about how there are companies out there, and every industry has them, but let's just stay with tech. That's where we live.
Yeah.
That there are companies that are good brands, but they have what they want brand supremacy. They
Mm-hmm.
want everyone to know that they're there. So we can name them. Cisco's out in there, Microsoft's in there, Google. They want the customer to know that they're there.
Right.
But none of them can, as you said, and I've been saying this as well, no one company can solve for all the customers' needs or customers' issues. You need them to come together. And I agree with you on the idea about platforms and ecosystems. I think that there's a lot of power that comes from that. But how does that translate when you bring all these together? Let's come back to your car analogy. Is that even today, set aside the self-driving, everything computer, not to quote anybody, but that's just a conventional 57 Chevy. I can't tell you the different suppliers that went into that car, much less the ones that go into it today. So when we talk about platforms and about ecosystems, how do we make sure that, how do we make sure, or is it even important for the customer to know who the different players and components are there behind the orchestrator?
It's a good question. A couple more points on how I view platform, right? So to me, platform, the boundary condition for a platform is the platform can expand at near zero marginal cost. And then all expansion beyond that, where it's above zero marginal cost, is done by the ecosystem participants, right? To me, that's where the magic happens. So Microsoft will continue to scale Azure, and now, of course, the AI capabilities that they've sort of tacked onto Azure, at the cost of energy and capitalizing GPUs and building out data center space. But it's essentially near zero marginal cost when you consider what they're charging for it. But then the value that you get from Microsoft is not just that zero marginal cost expansion capability they provide you, but then it's all of the capital, all the balance sheets that were used to build functionality, business functionality, and technical functionality on top of that platform, right? So to me, that's the magic. Now, do I, as a customer, need to care which vendors are participating in which parts of that ecosystem? I think less and less that's true. I think the power of these platforms is they, A, democratize the ability to participate, and B, to an extent, the primary, they are the primary brand, and then the secondary or co-brand is less important and is increasingly controlled by them. And what I mean by control, you're very familiar with the marketplace mechanisms that these guys have rolled out. those marketplaces are now being used to shape the winners and losers, right, in those ecosystem participants, right? So Microsoft has a huge say in the insurance sector, which platforms or sub platforms become the dominant on Azure to serve the insurance sector through their marketplace mechanism and through their application of ESIF and client investment funds and so forth. They are literally shaping that ecosystem and orchestrating it in an ever tightening way, in part to create a better customer experience, to be fair to them and charitable, but also in part to create concentration of value and eliminate confusion in any given segment of the market. So I think there's this really interesting thing, and Larry, we're seeing it happen live, right? It's not like we're looking back over 20 years of history and going, okay, well, there's like a Harvard Business Review case study, and this is how it was done. We're seeing that study being written now, and AI is accelerating it. But I do think you're going to see the rise of platform companies in a way that we've never seen before, where they really will so dramatically have the ability to shape the ecosystem around them as well as orchestrate it. And I think that's the really interesting thing.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, but I do want to touch on the entire idea of the marketplaces, the ones being that feeder mechanisms into the platforms, and really the catalyst of the ecosystem. And I've been watching this for years. People think about marketplaces attached to these vendors as being something new. It's been around for 20 years or so. Um, and I remember the first time somebody came to me and asked me about my opinion of it. They said, this company came to us and they said they have this marketplace, and that our application is the one that fits a gap in their portfolio. And I'm like going, well, sure, they're saying that to everybody. And there's been this rush. You go to the Azure marketplace, you go to the AWS, you go to you know Salesforce's, thousands of ISVs, independent vendors, and applications, all about creating a barrier to entry. So, do you think though that there needs to be more of a control, a closed system rather than open systems, to create that higher value?
I think it's going to be. I think it's going to be in between, like everything. It's always messy, right?
Yeah.
But here's where and I agree, marketplaces have been around for decades. Actually, they've been around for thousands of years as a concept in business. I mean, marketplaces existed in earlier human civilization. It was one of the first business
See,
constructs ever.
something Roman Forum, Silk Road, right? Yeah, right.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Go
yeah,
visit Pompeii.
yeah.
Amazing marketplaces
Hmm.
before Vesuvius erupted. So the here's the point about how marketplace has gone from a place where you can get access to the catalog of the ecosystem to shaping the ecosystem. It's when they came out with the concept of private offers. And a private offer does what? It gives you drawdown credit against your commitment, right? And every company has the same issue. They make these massive commitments, particularly to the hyperscalers, and they basically committed their IT budget, right, or a huge percentage of their IT budget to Microsoft or its peers. And now the only question is, how do they shape that expenditure to drive the maximum business value output? Number one. And number two, how do they make sure they draw down their commitment, right? Because otherwise they can't convert the CapEx to OpEx. So the private marketplace offers now are being used to shape that. If you want to get drawdown, you're not going to buy Guidewire if you're an insurance carrier, because Guidewire isn't even on the Microsoft marketplace, and you have an Azure commit. You're going to buy one of the platforms for insurance that gives you drawdown through a marketplace private offer. So we are seeing these hyperscalers start to redefine winners and losers in the smaller segments of the market through this private offer mechanism. And do I think it's good or bad? Well, it depends on the day that you ask me. Mostly, I think it's kind of bad, but I also think it's good because at the end of the day, clients historically have spent too much time. Companies have spent too much time trying to pick between A, B, and C when it's distinction without difference, right? Um, versus just getting on with it. And so there is an argument to say, look, we should just have a default button that is easy for companies to get their drawdown and to get the business value. And we can then concentrate more of our capabilities around a simpler set of participants in the ecosystem. So yes, there's benefits and there's drawbacks, but nonetheless, I think it's a secular trend, and I think we will see the platform companies in every industry exercising similar sorts of mechanisms to sculpt the ecosystem to be able to better determine the outcome and value for the end client.
You know, it's interesting when you talk about the transformational effect of private offers having in the commits that companies are making in exchange for price concessions. You know, shameless plug here, Channelnomics. We have a paper on this about the economics of hyperscalers and
Yep.
why they are literally a gravitational black hole. You know, and it's not saying that in a bad way, but once a CFO figures this out, then in fact, we're hearing about this now, is that there are enterprises out there that are overcommitting to the hyperscalers because they think of those commits as almost being like free money to spend down. And so there's interesting, you know, there's benefits, there's drawbacks, of course, but it's interesting to see how that just changes the equation.
Well, if hyperscalers are black holes, signing a commit is essentially the same as hitting the event horizon now, isn't
it? Pretty much.
it?
But you know, it's an interesting question though, is that we get, and everyone, Greg and I were at an event a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about this, is that we operate today almost in a world that is built around scarcity. That there's a finite amount of resources and value that is out there that we're all competing for. And Greg, I want to return to this because I thought it was a really interesting, and it's a conversation we don't particularly have very often. But as we see the expansion of hyperscalers, the expansion of these ecosystems and platforms, and now you have the amplification effect of efficiency coming from AI and agenics. Do you see us moving from a place, an economy or a market of where it's built around scarcity to where it can be built around abundance?
Yeah. So, you know, I've said many times that our success at EY the last better part of a decade has been because we've optimized for the scarcity we have. So if you are at any company in the quote partnerships or alliance or ecosystem, whatever term you use, right? You're in the G&A budget, which is the last budget you want to be in at any company because you're fighting out for budget with the people that fix the printers and the people that do the taxes. You're all in the same budget. So the amount of money you're going to get is always going to be capped by the expense ratio and your relative political maneuvering versus all the other people that are trying to get that G&A budget allocations. So now you got your money. It's not going to be much money. How do you enable what should be a massively powerful surface area to market, right? The whole reason for partnering is that you have your direct channels to market, your direct sellers and account executives and handlers, as well as all the go-to-market mechanisms of your partners as well, who also have sellers. And then, of course, you might have mechanisms like marketplaces sprinkled in there as well. So you've got all this surface area to market that if you could activate all of it effectively, you would probably sell more than you could ever actually make or deliver, right? But the reality is you don't activate even 1% of it. You just try to activate the right 1% of it to maximize what you get out of it, given the fact that you have a finite budget, right? So optimizing scarcity, and the better you are at that, the more impact you can have. And you heard, if you're even reasonably good at it, as we were, you can have a big impact on the growth of your enterprise. So now imagine if we went from a world where, because of AI, we don't have to have a scarcity mindset anymore. We can now activate the entirety of the surface area, or at least dial it up and down so we don't oversell, right? To get our value proposition to the right client at the right time for the right price point and the right time frame and so forth. So that's the sort of big opportunity. And it's not just a partnering statement, it's just a general go to market statement, right? How do you optimize instead of for scarcity? How do you create abundance in terms of your surface area activation? And the answer is you no longer take the position that my job is to enable humans. My job is to build AI harnesses around every product that matters, that can recognize the buying signals through the data, and then they can activate the humans when there's an actual opportunity for that human to pursue. And it doesn't matter if that human being never heard of the solution or product before. It doesn't matter they don't know how to sell it. That's okay. The AI will take them on the journey, right? And once we figure that out, right, the products activate the humans to bring the humans into the loop when the humans need to be in the loop, versus the humans trying to recognize signals that they'll never recognize because they've got too many signals coming at them and too many products that they represent and too little time. This is when we will go from optimizing for scarcity to dialing up the abundance. And that is something that really excites me, and I think is going to be game changing and is really going to unlock the value of these ecosystems, because now we'll be able to activate them at a scale that is a multiple of what we're able to do today.
Yeah, I'm I completely agree with you, except for being the excited part of it. Um, Again, I'm gonna put my curmudgeon hat on, and
Awesome.
it's no, I mean it's look, I agree with everything you say because I think it does open up a huge world of potential possibilities. Anything is possible. And I've joked over the years, I've blamed marketers for convincing customers that anything can happen in the cloud. It's all pixie dust and rainbows and unicorns and just magic can happen there. We
Right.
know that that's just not the case. But when you start looking at things like Gartner, has said that by 2028 there's going to be 15 billion machine to machine buying systems out there, so that machines will just be transacting between each other with independently.
Yeah.
You start looking at the potential of artificial general intelligence to actually take over more of the tasking, like what you're talking about. I've been reading a lot lately about artificial human intelligence, actually hardwiring us to where we actually have artificial components that make us better. Not physically perhaps, but at least mental acuity, being able, I mean, it's just when you start reading about this stuff, it's like, okay, yes, I can be like Neo and learn Kung Fu in seconds. Um, Not that I want to do that. But there is I do wonder though, is that how much do we surrender to all this, and how much of this is just things that we should be embracing for the sake of optimization and efficiency.
I do believe that what you said is, or what Gartner claims, is probably in the ballpark. I think
Hmm.
there'll be a lot of what I'll call non strategic purchasing that will be done agent to agent, because it's non differentiated and it doesn't matter.
Hmm.
But I also think there'll be a clear line in the sand or bifurcation in the market where there are certain things that are strategic, where we're not going to have agents do the buying and selling. It'll still be human to human. It'll still be trust based. We'll still go through an agonizing decisioning process uh, in order to make a buying decision, and we'll be influenced by human actors in that buying decision.
Yeah,
And I
and
think
and and human
that's the
actors, human actors, you mean office politics?
Oh, I mean everything. I
Yeah.
mean, sure, there's the intra company, but then there's also, look, I think a great seller isn't successful because they're good at representing the features and functions of their product. They're great because they're good at explaining to you the outcomes that you'll be able to generate with their product or service, and be more compelling about the value of that outcome versus the way it's being explained by your competitors. So to me, you are still going to have a huge part of the market where humans are creating context for other humans to make better buying decisions. And so that's the part of the market I think that we can unlock, because I can tell you mathematically it doesn't work today. I'll give you two examples. So, you know, at my old company, our sellers had to have facility with dozens, scores of different service offerings to do their jobs. And then you layered onto that all of the additional solutions that we would build with our partners like Microsoft, SAP, and others. The list of, I'll call them SKUs, the list of SKUs that any one of those sellers had to be facile with was way too long for any one human being. And so what do? They do what every human being, they optimize for scarcity. They will sell the SKUs that they get paid on, and they will sell the SKUs they're comfortable with, and everything else is a long tail that they don't touch, right? And so when you add up all the missed opportunities from all those long tails that aren't touched, it's a lot of revenue, right? So, and you're not going to fix that by giving them better education or putting better marketing around them. You're going to fix that by the long tail telling them when they need to get involved. That's how you're going to fix it. But you still need them to then be able to go and sell the deal, to explain how the value that we're providing generates the outcome that's superior to any competitor's outcome or doing it yourself as the end client. And so I'm with you. I think there's a lot of low value selling that'll just go away. And then the human to human selling will be the really valuable stuff. And AI will largely eliminate sort of the what I view to be a lot of wasted cost in sales enablement. Why do I need to train Greg on 100 different SKUs when statistically he'll only ever run across 20 of them over the next 3 years? Versus when an opportunity presents itself because the signals are there, okay, the SKU can actually train Greg to sell the SKU when Greg actually needs to sell the SKU. That to me is the big pivot in the market.
Yeah. All right. So, Greg, I want to end our conversation just looking forward, and particularly since you, for whatever reason, want to live to be 100.
No,
But
150, 100-year career.
okay, in that case, I will not be seeing you. I will be taking my long nap. But let's look forward just over the next 3 to 5 years.
Sure.
What's missing today that we, as so dealing with the partners and the channels and the companies that feed into it, what are the over the next 3 to 5 years, what are the things that are missing today that we really need to be gearing up on, in your estimation?
Yeah, look, I think AI is both the greatest threat and greatest opportunity we've ever seen as a species at every level of business down through social. I'll leave the social out of this conversation. I think in the world of business, we need to think about what is the future value that our customers will consume that is the evolution of the value they're consuming today. I used automobiles to mobility as sort of an example that all of us can relate to. So if you're in the professional services industry, what is professional services going to be in 5 years? What's the value that's going to be consumed, and how are you going to participate in delivering that value? And I guarantee you it's going to be different than today. And I guarantee you, we're going to have different views of what that difference is, some of which will be more right than others. And there will be winners and losers. And there will be disruptors and disruptees. And if you as a company are not thinking very seriously that this is a 5-year window to act decisively and move quickly and make a bet, you're probably going to be a disruptee or disrupted, right? You may still guess wrong. You may still go down the wrong path, but it's better to be proactively going down the wrong path than to just become irrelevant, in my opinion, right? So, and then we need to think about, all right, well, if in 5 years, this is the value that we need to be able to deliver, and this is our role in delivering that value, how do we get there as quickly and efficiently as possible? And given the sheer cost of all that change. It can't be our balance sheet alone that gets us there. So how do we think about, are we the platform or are we on the platform? If the platform, right, what are the things we need to do to solidify our role as the platform, become the orchestrator? Who do we need to orchestrate? How do we need to shape it? And if we're the participant, okay, which platforms we need to be participating on, and how do we make sure we shape our portion of the overall end value proposition that's being delivered to lock in a moat and our share of wallet? That to me is the discussion every company needs to be having. And then when I think about specifically channel partner ecosystem, right, that is integral to the calculus. And it's not just the go to market side, it's the entire value chain. Who are the participants in the actual supply of value? What are different components of value? How do we bring them together in the make process? And then in the go to market, how do we take advantage of abundance to unlock maximal surface area to market for whatever that value proposition is? So to me, there is a lot of work to do. It starts with understanding what the value is going to be in 5 years, or at least making the bet, because that's what we're doing. We're making a bet, and then getting after it and having an ecosystem mindset. Either we're the orchestrator or we're participating. We need to understand that as well, and then how do we lock in? So that to me is the opportunity we all have in front of us.
And I agree with you. I think I hear George Patton's words, coming out of your mouth is that, even a mediocre plan today is better than, vigorously executed is better than a perfect plan tomorrow. And I agree with you. I think we as an industry take far too long to make decisions and not make bets. I think that too many of the companies around us, are play it safe too often. So it's a lot to look forward to.
It's going to be exciting. I'm looking
Yeah,
forward to it.
excellent. Greg, thanks for joining us. It's been a great pleasure to have you on. It's a great conversation as always. Thank you again.
And thank you very much for having me. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Well, that's about all the time we have for this edition of Changing Channels. I want to thank our guest, Greg Sarafin, again for joining us. It's a great conversation. I also want to thank all of you for tuning in again. We do Changing Channels to help illuminate and educate everyone about what's changing in the technology market as well as how it impacts the channel. If you like what we're doing here, please hit like, hit subscribe, tell your friends, and also check out the other podcasts we do in the margins and the network effect, as well as all the thought leadership and research content we have on Channelnomics. Until next time, I'm Larry Walsh.